So Graham and myself. Graham unfortunately passed away late last year, October last year, and obviously he was my best friend, and we met in the 1990s. We both worked at Butlins. So anyone who has been to Butlins prior to the tent that they built will know there used to be a venue called the Plaza, which was a kind of food court that had multiple different bits of food in it. So you could get like pizzas, you get pasta, you could get roast dinners, you can get all sorts of different stuff. I'm not exactly customer friendly, so I was put in the pot wash and I worked in one far corner of the venue. Graham is incredibly outgoing and bubbly and friendly. He worked in the burger bar right at the other end of the venue. He was a snotty-nosed, annoying 14-year-old kid. I was 19, and he would come into my venue. I'd glare at him and watch him and make sure he didn't touch anything, and then he'd leave. And then the person I was going out with at the time said to me, that 14-year-old kid, he's terrified of you. And I thought, good, I'm definitely doing something right. That'll keep him away. And then eventually she ended up saying to me, he's just told me he's living under Bognor Pier. He's homeless and he's 14, living under Bognor Pier. So obviously I did what anyone would do, and I said, well, if you're happy, we live in a studio flat, literally probably the size of these two desks. I said, why doesn't he come and stay with us? He can sleep on our floor. If you're okay with that, he can sleep on our floor. So obviously there was this 19-year-old lad inviting this 14-year-old to come and live with his girlfriend and him in the studio flat. And at that point he'd been living under the pier for a little while. And I didn't know about things like social services. Back at 19, I thought the world was what you saw. I didn't know about job centres, I didn't know about anything, because I had a job. So I didn't know about anything to do with support. And Graham obviously said, yeah, I'll go and live with this scary man and his nice girlfriend who isn't scary. And so that's what sort of happened for a while. Then social services obviously got involved because there's a 14-year-old lad now living with a 19-year-old lad and his 17-year-old girlfriend. And that was when I first heard about social services, and Graham ended up in the care system, and went through a number of different placements at that time. And he would tell me all his different stories about all the sort of underbelly of Bognor that I ignorantly knew literally nothing about. He would name all these, until I then worked in children's homes myself, and his knowledge was incredibly impactful for me, because the kids would be like, oh yeah, just off to see so-and-so. Like, red flag, I know that name, that's the local drug dealer. And so he knew literally everyone who you shouldn't know in Bognor. I didn't know any of these people. So his kind of outside of the home insight was incredibly helpful for me doing my job. But he would tell me all these stories of stuff happening to other kids in foster care and in children's homes. And then obviously from my side of things, I ended up working in mental health and then moved into working in children's homes. And I've read the first 100 or so pages of Helen's book so far. Been very busy since you've released it. So there's a scene that's depicted reasonably early on where there's a restraint. And it's a full floor restraint. That's very common. I've literally done hundreds of full floor restraints on children and teenagers over the years. It's something you have to do for the safety of that individual, but from the point of view of an onlooker, how Helen depicts it in the book is exactly what the teens would say. They would see it as, you staff are beating up the kids, you're pinning them down, you've got some teen perhaps lying on the ground. I'm not doing a weird duck, that is genuinely how they're lying on the ground. You're locking their arms in place so that they can't move, but you're not doing joint locks, but they're stuck on the ground and they can't move. But from someone standing over there who's got a member of staff perhaps blocking them and saying, you're not going in there, they're thinking, but you're beating him up. He's screaming and saying, get off me, effing get off me, you're hurting me, you're causing harm to him. And so you're constantly, as a member of staff, trying to weigh up the safety of that individual, making sure they don't do criminal damage, making sure they don't hurt the staff, making sure they don't hurt other residents, making sure they don't do anything that could, because your whole role as a care worker is to give these teens the best start in life. And part of that is don't get them a criminal record before they've even started their life. So you would do your absolute best. It'd be like, I'm holding you here because if I let go, you're going to thump me, I'm going to have to call the police. Or you're going to smash the TV, I'm going to have to call the police. And they will prosecute, and you'll have a criminal record, and you're just a young teenager. The flip side is there were good staff, there was lots of brilliant staff working in children's homes. There was also some not so good staff, and I don't mean just bad at their job, staff that shouldn't have been doing the job. I had a manager in a children's home where fairly early on in my career doing that sort of work, I was stood in a doorway like that, holding myself in the doorway so that no one could get through the door, with a manager and my senior member of staff pushing on me, trying to get in the room, a teenager pushing on the back of me, so the teenager saying from behind me, it's okay, I can deck them, let them in, and the two members of staff, it's about 3 a.m, and I'm sort of trapped in the doorway, the two members of staff pushing on me, saying, get out the way, we're going to deck him. And so I've got my manager and my senior member of staff trying to beat up a teenager who stood behind me, wanting to beat up the two staff in front of me. And all I could think at 3 a.m. while I'm stood there stopping adults from beating up a child was, I'm supposed to be facing that way, stopping the child getting out and beating up the adults. And yet I was here doing it the wrong way round. I had seen staff rub kids' faces on gravel, and a member of staff did that. I reported it and got told off for reporting it and not showing solidarity to the staff team. But I reported it. The teenager blamed himself. The teenager said, I deserved it. I have been horrible to them all day. I deserved that. My response to the teenager was, you have been horrible to them all day, but their job is to look after you, not to hurt you. So there were really unsavoury people in there, so it's totally legitimate that, like what Helen's written about, these people get into these jobs because they perhaps are power hungry, the sort of not so good thing about CRB checks is that they only show up something when you've been caught for something, and if you've been caught for something, you don't normally then go for the jobs because you know as soon as you do the check, it's going to come up. I know of a member of staff who was giving the teens drugs to get them to sleep at night. We all thought she was a wonderful member of staff because she was so clever, she could always get the kids to sleep really early. And then she one day forgot to bring her drugs into work, and the teens grassed her up. And we had a police raid because the teens that she was giving drugs to had grassed her up and got her arrested for her failing to do the things she shouldn't have been doing. So there's lots of kind of dodgy stuff, but also a lot of stuff that just gets misconstrued. Like, you know, when you're doing restraint, you are doing it and you know you're doing it for the safety and the welfare of that teen or child, but how it is seen from others is like, a teenage brain is you are grabbing and holding someone, and also any prior abuse. This was our biggest issue as care staff, is any prior abuse that child or teen has had. When you're pinning someone down, that could have been the sort of thing they'd had in their prior abuse, that they could have been pinned down by an abuser. And you know you don't want to be pinning them down. You've got no choice but to do it. There was one lad who I held him in a certain move, and he literally went so mad, and I had to deal with the situation, which was fine. And afterwards, when he was calm and I went and talked to him and said, you know we have no choice but to do this. If you're losing your temper, we have to help you to manage your temper. What was that all about? Is there anything I could do differently so that, like, there's multiple different restraints I could do. Is there anything I could do differently? What was behind you kicking off at that moment? And he said, it was a very similar technique of him being pinned to the floor in that similar way that I was doing it when he was then abused and hurt. And so me doing a similar move to him triggered all that flood of memories in him that he then saw red and totally flipped out. So, yeah, so it's kind of like, thank you, Helen, for letting me come and talk here. But when Helen then said to me in 2019, you know, I'm writing this book, it's going to have this backstory in children's homes. you've got experience, haven't you, in children's homes? Yes, I've got the experience. And then I had recommended, you'll get my side of it in relation to, I can literally reel off stories much worse than anything that I'm likely to ever say here, as Helen knows, unfortunately. But my thinking was, do you not want to meet my friend, Graham? He literally has lived it. I can tell you my side of things. I can tell you what it's like to, from a staff perspective, to have to hold someone down. I can tell you the teens obviously saw it as, oh, you're beating them up, even though you know you're not beating them up. Just like, oh, my mum's so mean. Well, your mum's actually doing what she's supposed to do. She's not being mean. That is genuinely, when she says you're not going out, that's kind of her role, is to say you're not going out. She's not being mean. So you know that teens obviously see things differently to how you do. But I said the greatest insight you'll have is Graham. And if he's up for it, then meet him. And he was. As soon as I said to Graham, are you up for meeting someone and talking to them about what it's like in the care system and in Bognor Regis in the 90s, in the culture that was going on then, and about your experiences of being homeless and being in the shadows and trying to evade anyone like the police wanting to obviously eventually pick him up and return him home and all that sort of, because obviously he didn't want to be at home and all that sort of stuff. Are you comfortable to talk? He was instantly like, yeah, I'll do that. And if he was still alive now, he would be the one stood here, not me. He would be openly wanting to talk about everything. He would have read Helen's book, and he would openly be talking about everything that's in Helen's book. So anyway, that's what I've got to say.
Thank you very much.